Picture this. You're standing in a medieval European market, and a merchant opens a small pouch, not filled with gold, not filled with jewels, but with peppercorns, tiny black beads that look almost ordinary, yet people stare at them the way we stare at treasure. A few handfuls can settle debts, pay rent, buy favor, and in some places, buy land, because these little grains are not just seasoning, they are status, medicine, protection, and power. Now imagine a world where an empire decides that if pepper can make you rich, then controlling pepper can make you unstoppable. And suddenly, ships are built, oceans are crossed, wars are justified, and entire islands become battlefields, all for something that ends up in a pinch between your fingers. This is the hidden truth behind your spice rack. Spices didn't simply travel the world, they dragged the world into motion. They ignited rivalries, funded invasions, reshaped cuisines, and rewired global trade, long before oil or silicon ever ruled the planet. Tonight, we're going to follow flavor itself, from sacred medicine to monopoly, from the incense smoke of temples to the gunpowder smoke of colonial forts, and by the end, you'll never look at pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg the same way again. Welcome to Plates of the Planet, where every dish has a past and every bite tells a story. Before empires, there was a need. Spices begin. Before empires, before flags, before borders, back when human survival depended on reading the land like a living map. Early humans didn't just hunt and gather, they experimented. They learned which roots calmed the stomach, which leaves reduced fever, which bark soothed pain, which seeds made preserved food last longer on long journeys. In hot climates where meat spoiled fast and disease spread easily, anything that slowed decay or reduced infection wasn't a luxury, it was a shield. This is where spice earns its first identity, not as a flavor, but as a tool. In India, traditions like Ayurveda didn't treat turmeric or ginger as ingredients, but as balance, as energy, as a way to stabilize life itself. And in China, early medical systems used warming spices to restore harmony, because illness wasn't merely a problem to kill, it was imbalance to correct. Even across the Middle East and parts of Africa, aromatic resins and spices were valued because smell was power, scent was purification, and the burning of sacred aromas made people feel protected in a world they couldn't fully control. So from the start, spice is not just taste. Spice is preservation, healing, ritual, identity, and the earliest form of science wrapped inside a seed. The moment spice became sacred. As civilizations rose, spices moved from survival into symbolism. In ancient Egypt, where the afterlife mattered as much as the present, aromatic resins like frankincense and myrrh became part of death rituals, used in embalming and sacred ceremonies, because the body had to endure and the soul had to be guided. Spices were burned in temples, not simply to make the air smell good, but because smoke was believed to carry prayers upward, and aroma itself became a language between humans and gods. In many parts of Asia, spices became protective forces, woven into rituals, medicine, and daily customs. The world was filled with invisible danger, disease, spirits, misfortune, and spices offered a sense of control, like a warm shield you could drink, chew, inhale, or rub onto the skin. This is why spice stories are everywhere, from healing myths to sacred offerings, because when people don't fully understand what threatens them, they cling to what comforts them. And few things comfort like a smell that says, "You are safe, you are protected, you are clean." And once something becomes sacred, it becomes valuable. And once it becomes valuable, someone will try to control it. Trade routes, the world's first flavor network. Long before Europeans arrived, spices were already global. The ancient world had trade highways, and spices were among the most precious passengers. Across land, networks like the Silk Road connected East Asia to Central Asia and beyond. But the real spice superhighway was the sea, especially the Indian Ocean, where monsoon winds created a natural schedule, almost like nature's own shipping calendar. Traders learned to ride seasonal winds from India to Arabia, from Southeast Asia to Africa, from ports to marketplaces, turning the ocean into a living conveyor belt. Spices moved through layers of middlemen, and every step added mystery and markup. A clove grown in the far islands of Southeast Asia might pass through multiple hands before reaching a European table, and by the time it arrived, its origin had become a story, not a fact. Arab traders in particular became masters of the spice economy, controlling routes, protecting secrets, and sometimes spreading terrifying myths about where spices came from, because mystery adds value and fear protects monopoly. So Europe didn't simply crave spices. Europe craved what spices represented: distance, rarity, exotic power, and access to a world they didn't control. Europe's hunger, fear, fashion, and status. Medieval Europe was a world where food preservation was a constant battle, where winters were brutal, where disease was frequent, and where elites competed to display power at banquets. In that context, spices were not just pleasant, they were symbolic armor. Pepper could make preserved meat more palatable, cinnamon and cloves could transform dull dishes, and the aroma itself suggested wealth, because only the wealthy could afford food that smelled like faraway lands. Spices became a language of class. A feast with heavy spicing was a public statement. I have access to the world. And black pepper became so valuable that it was treated almost like currency. People didn't just sprinkle pepper. They guarded pepper, stored it carefully, measured it, traded it, and sometimes paid debts with it, because pepper didn't spoil, didn't rust, didn't lose value easily, and it was universally desired. And here's the most important shift. Europe's obsession wasn't just culinary, it became strategic. Because once a society believes a resource equals power, they don't simply want to buy it, they want to own the source. The first domino: bypassing the middleman. For centuries, European access to spices was limited by complex trade chains controlled by powerful intermediaries, and every intermediary raised the price. Venice grew wealthy by dominating parts of the Mediterranean trade, and European kingdoms watched that wealth and thought, why are we paying so much for something that grows elsewhere? That question became the spark that ignited the age of exploration, not because Europeans suddenly became adventurous, but because they became economically desperate and politically ambitious. If spices were the treasure, then the sea route to spices was the key, and Portugal was among the first to commit to the gamble. Ships ventured down the African coast, testing winds, currents, and fear itself, until eventually Portuguese navigators pushed around the Cape of Good Hope, opening a path into the Indian Ocean. When they reached spice-rich trading hubs, the goal wasn't simply to trade, it was to dominate, to build forts, seize ports, control choke points, and force the world to funnel flavor through their hands. This is where spice stops being commerce and starts becoming conquest. Ports, forts, and the new rule of the sea. Once European powers entered the spice network, they didn't behave like ordinary merchants. They arrived with cannons. They built fortified positions in strategic locations, places that controlled the flow of ships, and they used violence to reshape trade rules. The Portuguese established strongholds in key coastal areas, pushing their influence into the Indian Ocean trade. And as they expanded, other powers watched and refused to be left behind. The Dutch arrived with a new level of corporate aggression through the Dutch East India Company, a commercial machine with the power to wage war, sign treaties, build armies, and govern territories. Because this wasn't business the way we understand it today. It was a state-backed system where profit and empire became one creature. The British followed with their own trade empire, and suddenly the oceans became arenas of competition, where alliances were formed, betrayals were normalized, and entire regions were transformed into chessboards. In this era, spice doesn't just season food. Spice funds navies. Spice pays soldiers. Spice becomes an engine that drives the modern world into existence. Pepper. The black gold that started it all. Pepper deserves its own spotlight because it was the obsession that taught Europe how to hunger. Unlike some spices that grew in rare places, black pepper could be cultivated more widely, yet demand was so intense that it still held enormous value. Pepper wasn't just used to cover spoilage, as people sometimes claim. It was used because it was exciting, it was warming, it was exotic, it was a statement. And in a world where status mattered as much as survival, pepper became social power you could taste. Pepper's trade taught European powers the mechanics of control. You don't just need the crop, you need the roots, you need the ports, you need the pricing, you need the storage, you need the story. And once those mechanics are understood, it becomes easier to apply them to even rarer spices, the ones that truly drove empires mad. Nutmeg, the spice that revealed humanity's darkest side. Now we reach the spice that turns this story from intense into horrifying. Nutmeg, a warm, sweet aroma that today feels innocent, like holiday baking, yet in the 17th century, nutmeg was a prize so valuable that it fueled brutality on a scale that still shocks historians. Nutmeg was native to a tiny region, the Banda Islands in what is now Indonesia, and because it was geographically limited, controlling Banda meant controlling nutmeg, and controlling nutmeg meant controlling wealth. The Dutch East India Company pursued monopoly with a cold, calculated approach, using intimidation, forced treaties, and violence, and when resistance appeared, the response was devastating. Entire communities were displaced, killed, or enslaved, because in the logic of monopoly, people were obstacles, not lives. And here's the moment that reveals how insane the spice era truly was. Europeans negotiated over islands like chips in a poker game. In one famous exchange, the Dutch traded away their claim to Manhattan while securing dominance over a nutmeg-producing island. And in that moment, you can almost hear history laughing, because the island that seemed worth it at the time wasn't the one that would become a global superpower symbol. It was the one that smelled like spice. Nutmeg shows the truth clearly. Spices weren't just traded, they were fought over, and the costs were paid by the people closest to the source. Cloves, cinnamon, and the business of scarcity. Cloves, cinnamon, and other prized spices followed similar patterns. Scarcity created obsession. Obsession created competition. Competition created violence. Some spices were monopolized through controlled cultivation, others through controlling the export routes, and often through manipulating supply itself. Because when you control the flow, you control the price. And when you control the price, you control entire economies. This is the brutal genius of the spice trade. It turned plants into policy. It turned agriculture into geopolitics. It turned flavor into a reason for fleets to collide. The hidden engine, slavery, plantations, and erasure. As spice empires expanded, the labor system powering them grew darker. Many colonial economies relied on forced labor, displacement, and exploitation, and the wealth created by spices often never returned to the people who grew them. Indigenous knowledge about cultivation and processing was extracted while indigenous voices were silenced, and local identities were rewritten by foreign powers that renamed places, reshaped agriculture, and redirected profits outward. This is why the spice story is not just romantic ships and adventurous maps. It is also plantations, brutality, and stolen futures. It's easy to celebrate global cuisine and forget the cost, but a real documentary doesn't look away because authenticity requires the full truth. The Great Shift: How Spices Became Ordinary. And then something fascinating happens. Monopoly begins to crack. As cultivation spreads beyond original regions, as botanical knowledge grows, as colonies expand into new agricultural zones, spices slowly become less rare. Shipping improves, storage improves, global markets stabilize, and what once was locked away like treasure begins appearing in ordinary kitchens. Spices go from elite to everyday, and that changes the world again. Because when ordinary people can access flavor, culture spreads faster. Dishes evolve. New cuisines are born. Migration and trade mix spice traditions, and food becomes a living record of history. From curries shaped by trade winds to spice blends that carry centuries in a single smell. This is the quiet miracle. Once spices stop being monopoly weapons, they become cultural bridges. The modern spice world. Truth inside the jar. Today, spices are everywhere, and because they're everywhere, we assume they're simple, but the modern spice world is still complex. Many spices come from smallholder farmers who face unpredictable weather, unstable pricing, and pressure from middlemen. Adulteration becomes a modern shadow, because when demand is high and prices are tight, some markets cut corners, blending, diluting, and disguising, which means trust becomes a new kind of currency. At the same time, a new movement rises: single origin sourcing, transparent supply chains, ethical partnerships, and a return to respecting spice as more than a cheap powder. People are beginning to ask where their cinnamon comes from, how their pepper was harvested, whether their spice farming harmed forests, and whether the people closest to the source were paid fairly. In a strange way, we are returning to an ancient mindset that spice is not casual. Spice matters. Climate change. The next spice war has no navies. Now the story turns urgent again because the next spice war won't be fought by ships. It will be fought by temperature, rainfall, disease, and disappearing stability. Climate change threatens many spice-growing regions, making harvests unpredictable and forcing farmers to adapt or abandon crops that defined their communities for generations. When a spice becomes harder to grow, scarcity returns. And when scarcity returns, pressure rises. And when pressure rises, exploitation finds openings. So the future of spices isn't just about flavor. It's about resilience, sustainable farming, protecting biodiversity, and ensuring that the people who grow the world's flavor aren't the ones punished by a warming planet. The future of flavor: respect instead of conquest. But there's hope, and it's powerful. Modern chefs and conscious consumers are treating spices with renewed respect, not as cheap background noise, but as the main character of cuisine. People are rediscovering traditional spice blends, honoring the cultures that created them, learning the difference between freshness and dust, between real origin and vague labeling, between a supply chain that empowers and one that extracts. Technology is also reshaping spice farming through better irrigation, disease monitoring, and smarter cultivation, while ethical sourcing models aim to bring more money back to farmers, more transparency to consumers, and more protection to ecosystems. If the old spice wars were about domination, then the next era can be about connection. And that shift from conquest to conscience might be the most important transformation of all. Holding history between your fingers. Now, take a quiet second and look at the simplest moment in cooking. The moment you twist a pepper mill, the moment you sprinkle cinnamon into tea, the moment you grate nutmeg over a dish. It feels small. It feels ordinary. But hidden inside that moment is the roar of history. Trade winds crossing oceans, merchants guarding secrets, empires carving maps, islands turned into battlegrounds, farmers carrying the weight of global desire, and cultures shaping identity through taste. Spices prove something unforgettable. The smallest things can move the largest systems. They can connect continents, fund empires, ignite violence, and also inspire beauty, creativity, and shared human joy. And that's the real power of flavor. It isn't just delicious, it's meaningful. If you want more stories like this, where food becomes a window into history, culture, and the forces that shaped our world, subscribe to Plates of the Planet and travel the planet one plate at a time, because every dish has a past and every bite tells a story.